Yes, I believe that there are scenarios in which governments can justify having confidential information. And in fact, in the UK, there is a committee, a D-Notice committee, although its name might have changed now, that brings government and the media together to discuss to what instance information should be made public and reported on, and what instance it should be redacted or kept confidential.
But that's precisely the problem, right, that we have to grapple with, because the extent to which we are suggesting that, or rather you are suggesting that information be made public or at least be exchanged, would impede the way in which governments would work. Would you agree? It
doesn't impede the government's ability to keep things confidential for legitimate national security reasons. A Freedom of Information Act does not mean that every single classified top secret document automatically become public.
Yes.
And so within the UK, even with Tony Blair's Freedom of Information Act, there continues to be regular engagement and talks between government and the media about what is information that should be reported on and what should be kept confidential. In fact, for Tony Blair, what really undermines government trust is complicity in the Iraq War and the allegation that there were weapons of mass destruction. That really kills public trust. And I wouldn't say that was the Freedom of Information Act that killed public trust. I would say dropping bombs from Iraq on the basis of no real basis of weapons that aren't there kills public trust.
Matters that affect security, matters which affect the way in which governments do their work and decide on matters, form their decisions, would become subject to scrutiny. And that's not necessarily a good thing, is it?
I would say scrutiny is a lot of the times actually a good thing. They should be subject to scrutiny. They are elected officials. And as I already said, excuse me, let me finish. As I already said, the existence of a Freedom of Information Act does not preclude things being classified and top secret. So the UK does have a Freedom of Information Act. It does also still have plenty of documents and operations and exercises that are still classified and top secret.
And then thereafter there lists a series of requests which are not in the spirit of this act. For example, if you just look, and this is the UK's review, request for the total amount spent on Ferrero Rocher chocolates in the UK. Request from a vintage lorry spotter to 387 local authorities for the registration numbers of all vintage lorries in their stock. A request for information on a sweater given by President George Bush by number 10, and the list goes on. So yes, they are not national security classifications, but do you not regard this as something that one has to think about, the impact it has on government resources?
Do we not value transparency over the fact that some people might ask for the total amount of money spent on Ferrero Rocher chocolates? Wouldn't the principle of transparency and open access to information, public information, be an important principle to uphold? Yes, of course, there will always be some joker who wants to know how much was spent on pineapple tarts in the ministry or how many tissue boxes were bought. But I would say that the principle of transparency and the principle that it would demonstrate the government standing of accountability to its people outweighs the fact that some people will ask for very random things.
And the way you would contemplate this act working is that at some stage, not immediately, but at some stage after a time lapse, information will be disclosed.
Yes, I believe that for particular I think there's two parts. So one is the freedom of information, where people can request for public information, and if it's a national security issue, the government can go and contest it. But then separate to that, I also suggested that we have some process of declassifying classified documents after a lapse of time. Yes.
So in those situations, issues of national security or otherwise,
yes, after a lapse of time, when if it's considered that after this lapse of time it's no longer a security issue, then yes, it should be declassified. If it is still considered to be a security issue, then the government, of course, should have the avenue to argue that case and to argue for it to be continued to be classified. So, for example, just now in that Prince Charles case, I note that the Guardian requested the information in 2005, but the article was only in 2015, which, after 10 years, we've moved on from the Iraq War, so I think that's also perhaps one of the reasons why it was eventually disclosed.